In the Old Testament, specifically reading the Torah, the rabbis had a way of reading and discussing Scripture. They would throw a story out there, one of these classic Old Testament tales, and then they would sit around and they would discuss and they would listen for what is the meaning of the story. But they weren't looking for one meaning. They were looking for the meanings. The rabbis were looking to extract from their students, what are the ways that we can interpret this rich story that's been passed down by oral tradition. The goal was never to get an exact, precise meaning for all people, for all times. Often we read Scripture kind of trying to do that. The goal in the oral tradition was not even to write the story exactly correctly. The goal wasn't to get the exact story. The goal was to tell the story well and listen for what meanings there might be. That is the tradition that Jesus and the disciples inherit. When Jesus tells parables and his disciples listen and they try to interpret. Often, I personally get caught up trying to say, what is the meaning of this parable? And the disciples sometimes get tripped up as well. But in the rabbinic tradition, the goal wasn't to get the meaning. The goal was to explore the meanings. The goal was to listen to what God might be saying to the group of people in that moment. And we're going to follow suit in our listening of a parable today for two reasons. One, I think it aligns with the rabbinic tradition, the tradition that Jesus is telling these parables in. Two, I don't know what the parable means, so I need your help. So we're going to do this one together. Often I can kind of give you with some certainty a really great meaning from a parable, but this one is just all over the place. So I'm going to read it, and we're going to try to reckon with it a bit. I've got some things to extract, but I want you to use your imagination as we do, because I'm not going to find a landing spot. We're going to end with questions today. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much money do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much money do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than they are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The word of the Lord. Did you feel the back and forth there? There's this manager who's caught squandering his boss's money, and his boss brings him in, he demands the records, and he's going to fire him. He apparently doesn't have any other employable skills. Admittedly, he's too proud to beg. He also doesn't really seem to have any friends that are going to be helping him out, so he sets out to make some new friends that might be able to help him out. Might be able to give him work or lend a hand if he needs one. The manager, presumably before word gets out that he's being fired, calls on those people who have debts. One guy who owes for 100 jars of olive gets his bill cut down to 50. Another for 100 containers of wheat, and his manager cuts his bill down to 80. That's a pretty good deal. I'd like to pay half of what I owe. It doesn't indicate that he collects any money from these guys. The story just says he makes friends by reducing their debt. Then, oddly, upon hearing that this manager has gone out and done this, reduced his debt, the original boss commends the dishonest manager for having acted shrewdly. It isn't clear if this convinces the boss to keep the manager on. Maybe he keeps his job, I don't know. But at the very least, the manager made friends who might be able to help him out. He made a name for himself among these guys by reducing this debt. And the parable ends with Jesus saying, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. What? It's very confusing. Why would Jesus tell his disciples to act like this dishonest guy who leverages his role, manipulating money that doesn't belong to him, and makes friends to provide his own security? Why would Jesus condone that? I don't know. That's why we're listening today. I've read a lot of commentaries on this one, and there are a lot of interpretations out there. Perhaps this is hyperbole from Jesus, this statement, or maybe Jesus is being sarcastic to the disciples. Yeah, go make wealth by dishonest means, because you're going to take that money with you when you die, essentially is what he's sarcastically saying, maybe. Obviously, making wealthy friends today will not guarantee you any friends in the afterlife, if you listen to the rest of the teachings of Jesus. Perhaps Jesus really is condoning stealing from the rich to give to those who are in debt or have less. Maybe that's what Jesus is doing here. When we read Luke, it's important to read the little stories in light of the whole Gospel of Luke, and to read the Gospel in light of each of these little stories. Luke talks a lot about wealth and money, more so than any other Gospel writer. Maybe it's because he's a doctor and he was pretty wealthy himself, probably. And in a bunch of places in Luke, Jesus appeals to his disciples and to others for the generous sharing of wealth and resources to those who have less. Over and over again, it's about sharing with those who have less. You can go and look in Luke 12, twice in Luke 12, Luke 14. We're going to look at Luke 16, 19 through 31 next week and hear another story about wealth. Or Luke 18 or Luke 19. You'll see this theme over and over again. It seems that at the very least, the manager has done something good by taking from this rich man and giving to those who are less fortunate. Maybe that's what the parable is about. I'm not sure. But by the reading of all of Luke, Jesus is certainly not endorsing stealing or manipulating or cheating in order to save your own hide. So if you're thinking Jesus is giving you license to be a crooked business person, look elsewhere. That's not what's happening here. Again, I don't know that Jesus is condoning the manipulation to have distributed wealth, but maybe it's the principle of having made relationships that lead to more for all. Maybe it's the heart of the relationships that the man creates that distributes wealth. That is the thing that Jesus is condoning. Importantly, our reading includes more than just the story that helps provide some clarity. You'd think when you hear the story, you'd think the manager is going to get crushed by his boss for having stolen his money and justice will be served, right? But then there's this little bit in the middle about he's being rewarded for what he's done or commended for what he's done. Then the reading includes this section to come back the other way. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? If you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters. You can't serve both God and wealth. Okay, that seems to be the opposite take that Jesus just had. It feels like a 180 from Jesus having commended the manager for having made rich friends to join him in the afterlife. It's one of the bits that makes this parable so confusing. This guy is dishonest with little and much. He is unfaithful with dishonest wealth. He is not faithful with another's wealth. Jesus teaches now, if you're like the manager, then you won't be trusted with anything. Then, he says something that I think helps clear some things up, but not all of it. You can't have two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. Using this conclusion, the whole story may be read kind of like a setup. Jesus baits the listener into wondering if the manager is right in choosing to do what he had to do in order to secure the future, when that is only one of the issues that lies at the heart of the parable. The deeper question may be about not just how he deals with his wealth or lack thereof. The real issue may be about who is the real master in the story. Who is the real master of the manager and of this extremely generous boss? Jesus' teaching on Luke about wealth assumes an economy. It doesn't say it's bad to have money altogether or that you won't have to deal with money. We all have to deal with it. The teaching about money in many stories like this is that you cannot serve money over God, and that is the primary principle. You cannot pursue your wealth over your relationship with Christ. So we see a story like this where a guy secures his future by being dishonest and by doing what he has declared his devotion to money and security. He values his own security over an ethical life. Now, I promise I didn't squeeze this story about money into the month where we're having a pledge drive. We're having two texts about wealth this month, and it's the lectionary's fault, not mine. These are prescribed readings. But I will say, as we talk about stewardship this morning, and as we talk a little bit more about stewardship at our meeting this afternoon, our lives should reflect the notion that our master is Jesus and not the economy or the almighty dollar. As we see those in need, as our congregation has needs, as God calls us, we ought to give generously to demonstrate that we are not like the unrighteous manager, hoarding wealth for ourselves or stealing wealth from others to make our way. That our service in our life belongs to God and not money should be what we testify. And truthfully, it's something that I have to do over and over again. I don't know if you're anything as greedy as me. But the reason that Cal and I give regularly at Valley is every payday we need to remind ourselves that money doesn't have our allegiance, that our security and our wealth is in the kingdom that God is making. It is in the cross and self-giving love and not this other stuff. Because I love to see that bank account tick up personally. I love to get to buy new stuff for myself. I love to have the personal financial security. But it is a practice, a spiritual practice for me to choose to give every time I get paid in order that this place may continue to grow and that others who have less than me might have more. If I put all my personal needs and wants ahead of the needs of others, I ought to reflect on my devotion to God and to the mission of Christ. God's inbreaking reign is one in which we all share generously from what we have, and nobody has need. Maybe that's the principle at the heart of the text. Maybe the whole ethical or unethical debate that goes on in the passage was simply to get the readers or the listeners' attention. That what really matters is who has your allegiance. Is it money or is it God? Now, I don't have a perfect way to understand it. I've talked a bit about how I might read it, how I reckon with its possible meanings and implications, but parables, like we said, are designed to challenge, make the listener think critically, designed to interpret. And I hope that your lunch conversations are a bit of interpretation today. Maybe you're talking to your spouse or your friends about what might be going on here. And there are more than one thing going on. There's many things going on in this passage. One commentary I read offered a few helpful questions that I want to end on. The worship team is going to come back up, but I want to leave you with a few questions that arise from this passage. How might this passage contribute to Luke's insistent appeal for the generous sharing of wealth with the under-resourced? How might a 21st century person, us, and community of faith prove strategic and wise in forming a sustaining relationship that fosters the well-being of others? How can we use our relationships well to lift up those who are around us? How might we evaluate our relationship to wealth and security in light of our devotion to God and in light of the self-giving Jesus? Some food for thought.